12. Underrated guitarists who changed R&B soul forever. Before R&B and soul became global sounds before the charts, the trophies, and the legends, we praise today there were guitarists you were never taught to remember. Men who shaped the feeling of the music while standing just outside the spotlight. Their riffs moved generations, their rhythms built empires, yet their names faded into the background. Today we're pulling back the curtain on the 12 underrated guitarists who changed R&B and soul forever. If you love real music history, not headlines, stay with us, subscribe, and comment below. This is Legends of Black Excellence. Cornell Dupree. Cornell Dupree is one of the most influential guitarists in the history of R&B and soul, yet his name rarely appears in mainstream conversations. Born in 1942 in Fort Worth, Texas, Dupree didn't chase stardom, he mastered service. Over the course of his career, he is officially credited on more than 2,000 recorded sessions, a figure verified by industry archives and musician unions, making him one of the most recorded guitarists of all time. His fingerprints live inside the sound of classic soul, even when listeners never knew who was responsible. Dupree became a core member of Aretha Franklin's touring and studio band, helping define the elegant groove behind her late 1960s and 1970s recordings. His playing was never about speed or volume. Instead, he specialized in placement, knowing exactly when to enter, when to pull back, and when to let silence speak. That sensitivity made him a first-call guitarist for artists such as Donny Hathaway, King Curtis, Roberta Flack, and countless others. Producers trusted him because he understood one truth many guitarists never learn. R&B is built on feel, not ego. What set Dupree apart was his touch. He favored clean tones, muted rhythms, and chord voicings that wrapped around the singer rather than competing for attention. In a studio era where tape was expensive and mistakes mattered, his reliability was legendary. Engineers often noted that his first take frequently became the final take, not because it was flashy, but because it felt right. Do you think modern music still leaves enough room for this kind of restraint, or has subtlety been pushed aside by excess beyond performance? Dupree's influence extended into mentorship. Younger musicians studied his phrasing to understand how R&B guitar could breathe inside a rhythm section. He proved that groove could be powerful without aggression, and emotional without melodrama. Even funk and neo-soul players later borrowed his approach to timing and space, whether they realized it or not. Cornell Dupree passed away in 2011, but his legacy remains deeply embedded in the DNA of soul music. Every smooth transition, every perfectly placed rhythm guitar behind a great vocal owes something to his philosophy. He may never have stood center stage, but without him, the stage itself would have felt empty. Eddie Hazel. Eddie Hazel remains one of the most emotionally powerful guitarists ever to emerge from R&B and funk. Yet his name is still far less recognized than the sound he created. Born in 1950 in Brooklyn, New York, Hazel rose to prominence as the lead guitarist for Parliament Funkadelic, a collective that reshaped black music in the 1970s. While the group was known for its flamboyant stage shows and cosmic imagery, Hazel's guitar work was the emotional engine underneath it all. What made Hazel different was not speed alone, but expression. His playing carried pain, joy, chaos, and vulnerability in equal measure. This was never clearer than on Maggot Brain 1971, a nearly 10-minute guitar solo recorded in a single take. According to producer George Clinton, Hazel was told to play as if he had just learned his mother had died. The result is now widely regarded by critics and musicians as one of the greatest guitar performances in recorded music, cutting across soul, funk, and psychedelic rock without fitting neatly into any category. Hazel blended blues phrasing, distorted rock tones, and gospel-like emotion, proving that funk guitar could cry as much as it could groove. His influence later surfaced in neo-soul, alternative R&B, and even hip-hop production, where raw feeling became as valuable as technical polish. Many modern guitarists study Hazel not for clean execution, but for how fearlessly he translated inner turmoil into sound. Despite his brilliance, Hazel's career was deeply affected by personal struggles, including substance abuse and health issues. Unlike many of his peers, he never fully escaped the pressures of the industry or the weight of sudden creative expectations. By the late 1970s, his appearances became sporadic, and his contributions were often overshadowed by the collective's larger spectacle. Yet musicians inside and outside funk circles continued to speak of him with near reverence. Eddie Hazel passed away in 1992 at just 42 years old, but his legacy has only grown since. Today, Maggot Brain is consistently ranked among the greatest guitar recordings ever made, and his approach to emotional honesty continues to influence generations of artists. Hazel proved that R&B and funk guitar didn't need to stay in the background. It could speak, scream, and confess. He wasn't just playing notes. He was exposing the soul behind them. Bobby Womack. Bobby Womack is often remembered for his raw, confessional voice, but long before the spotlight settled on his singing, his guitar was already shaping the emotional language of soul music. Born in Cleveland, Ohio in 1944, Womack grew up immersed in gospel learning, early that music wasn't about perfection, it was about truth. That belief followed him into the studio, where his guitar work became a quiet but decisive force behind some of soul's most intimate recordings. In the early 1960s, Womack worked closely with Sam Cooke, contributing guitar parts that were subtle yet deeply expressive. Rather than filling space, he carved it using bends, slides, and restrained chord changes to heighten feeling without distracting from the vocal narrative. His approach treated the guitar as a second storyteller, one that responded emotionally to the singer rather than competing with them. This sensitivity made him invaluable in sessions where mood mattered more than volume. As Womack transitioned into a solo career, his guitar didn't disappear, it evolved. On his own records, the instrument often carried emotional weight between vocal lines, reinforcing themes of regret, longing, and survival. His playing reflected lived experience shaped by personal loss, industry pressure, and complicated relationships. Unlike many contemporaries chasing technical dominance, Womack leaned into imperfection, allowing slight roughness in tone to mirror the honesty of his lyrics. When an artist reveals this much vulnerability, do you connect more deeply, or does it make the music harder to hear? Commercially, Womack's influence was substantial. He wrote and recorded songs that crossed soul, R&B, and pop boundaries, while his guitar sensibility informed arrangements that felt conversational rather than constructed. Producers trusted him because he understood balance, when to pull the listener closer and when to let the silence do the talking. That instinct would later influence neo-soul artists who prioritized emotional realism over polished presentation. Despite chart success and industry respect, Womack's contributions as a guitarist were frequently overlooked, overshadowed by his voice and songwriting. Yet musicians studying soul history consistently point to his phrasing as a blueprint for expressive restraint. He showed that guitar could function as emotional punctuation, underscoring pain, hope, or reflection with a single well-placed note. Bobby Womack passed away in 2014, leaving behind a catalog that continues to resonate with listeners who value honesty over spectacle. His guitar work reminds us that soul music isn't about showing how much you can play. It's about showing how much you feel. Jimmy Nolen. Jimmy Nolen was not just a guitarist, he was the engine that powered funk. Born in 1934 in Oklahoma City, Nolen found his true musical home when he joined James Brown's band in the mid-1960s. At a time when R&B guitar was still rooted in blues runs and melodic fills, Nolen introduced something radically different: rhythm as the lead voice. His invention of the chicken scratch guitar style didn't decorate funk music, it defined it. This technique relied on muted strings, sharp syncopation, and relentless precision. Nolen treated the guitar almost like a percussion instrument, locking tightly with the drums and bass. On landmark recordings such as Papa's Got a Brand New Bag, Cold Sweat, and I Got You, I Feel Good, his playing stripped harmony down to its essentials, leaving only pure groove. Music historians widely credit these records as the birthplace of modern funk, and Nolan's guitar was at the center of that transformation. What made Nolan extraordinary was discipline. James Brown demanded absolute rhythmic accuracy, often signaling changes with hand gestures mid-performance. Nolan responded instantly, maintaining razor-sharp timing night after night. Unlike flashy soloists, he rarely stepped forward. His role was to make people move physically involuntarily. That approach reshaped how guitar functioned in black music, influencing R&B, disco, hip-hop, and even electronic production decades later. Nolan's influence extended far beyond his lifetime. Countless hip-hop tracks sample James Brown's catalog, meaning Nolan's rhythm guitar continues to echo through modern music culture. Contemporary funk and neo-soul guitarists still study his muted strumming patterns as foundational technique. Despite his massive impact, Jimmy Nolan remained largely invisible to the mainstream audience. He never released a major solo album, never sought celebrity, and rarely received public credit equal to his influence. Yet musicians understood his importance. To them, Nolan wasn't background, he was structure. Without his guitar, funk as we know it simply wouldn't exist. Jimmy Nolan passed away in 1983, but his legacy remains embedded in the rhythm of black music. Every tight groove, every syncopated R&B rhythm, every beat-driven guitar part owes something to his vision. He proved that guitar didn't need to sing to lead, it could drive. And in doing so, he permanently changed the sound and direction of R&B and soul. Al McKay. Al McKay is one of the most quietly influential guitarists in the history of R&B and soul, a musician whose power came not from volume or virtuoso solos, but from precision. Born in New Haven, Connecticut in 1943, McKay found his defining platform as the rhythm guitarist for Earth, Wind & Fire during their most successful era. At a time when many guitarists were chasing speed and spotlight, McKay chose discipline, clarity, and control choices that would permanently shape the sound of black popular music. What set McKay apart was his mastery of rhythm guitar as an architectural force. His playing didn't sit on top of the groove, it locked into it. Songs like September Sing a Song and Shining Star depended on his tight muted strums and impeccably timed chord accents. These weren't decorative layers, they were structural elements. Music analysts often point out that Earth, Wind & Fire's global appeal, including over 90 million records sold worldwide, relied heavily on rhythmic balance, and McKay's guitar was central to that balance. Unlike funk guitarists who emphasized grit, McKay brought polish without losing soul. His tone was clean, bright, and sharply articulated, allowing complex arrangements filled with horns, vocals, and percussion to breathe. In live performances, his consistency was striking. He rarely deviated, not because he lacked creativity, but because he understood repetition as power. Groove in his hands became hypnotic rather than static. Do you think modern musicians still respect repetition as an art form, or has constant variation replaced discipline? McKay's influence extended beyond Earth, Wind & Fire. As a session musician and musical director, he carried his rhythmic philosophy into film scores, television soundtracks, and later collaborations. Guitarists in disco pop and contemporary R&B borrowed his approach: tight chords, short strokes, and rhythmic patience, often without realizing where the blueprint originated. His style proved that rhythm guitar could be just as influential as a lead melody, especially when the goal was movement rather than attention. Despite decades of success, Al McKay never positioned himself as a guitar hero. He avoided excess, trusting that feel would outlast fashion. That restraint is precisely why his work remains timeless. Remove his guitar from Earth, Wind & Fire's catalog, and the songs don't collapse, but they lose their pulse. Al McKay's legacy is a lesson in musical maturity. He showed that greatness doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it repeats, locks in, and lets the world dance without ever asking for credit. Curtis Mayfield. Curtis Mayfield was not only one of the most important voices in soul music, he was also one of its most distinctive and underrated guitarists. Born in Chicago in 1942, Mayfield approached the guitar in a way that defied the dominant styles of his time. While many players emphasized blues runs or rhythmic aggression, he chose gentleness. His guitar spoke softly, yet carried enormous emotional and political weight, reshaping how R&B and soul could communicate. Mayfield's signature style relied on open tunings, light string pressure, and unusual chord voicings that sounded almost fragile. This technique allowed his guitar to shimmer rather than strike, creating a floating spiritual atmosphere beneath his vocals. On songs like People Get Ready Gypsy Woman and later Superfly, the guitar wasn't there to impress, it was there to guide emotion. Music scholars often note that his approach made complex social messages feel personal, intimate, and human. Unlike many guitarists, Mayfield rarely used solos to assert dominance. Instead, his playing functioned like a second narrator, quietly reinforcing themes of hope, struggle, faith, and resilience. His guitar parts were deceptively simple, but incredibly hard to replicate because they relied on touch rather than technique. That sensitivity made his sound instantly recognizable within seconds, even without vocals. As a composer and producer, Mayfield's guitar choices shaped entire arrangements. He understood space, allowing silence and sustain to do as much work as notes themselves. This restraint influenced generations of soul, neo-soul, and conscious R&B artists who learned that subtlety could carry truth more effectively than force. Commercially, Curtis Mayfield's impact was undeniable. His work helped define the sound of socially conscious black music in the late 1960s and 1970s, and his songs continue to be sampled, covered, and studied decades later. Yet his guitar contributions are often overshadowed by his songwriting and activism, despite being central to how his messages landed emotionally. After a tragic accident in 1990 left him paralyzed, Mayfield continued to create music, proving that his artistry was rooted in spirit, not physical ability. He passed away in 1999, but his guitar legacy remains deeply embedded in soul music's emotional vocabulary. Curtis Mayfield showed the world that a guitar didn't need volume to be powerful. In his hands, it became a voice of conscience, quiet, compassionate, and impossible to ignore. Ray Parker Jr. Ray Parker Jr. is widely known to the general public for Ghostbusters, but long before global fame, he had already reshaped R&B and soul from the shadows. Born in Detroit in 1954, Parker came up during a period when session musicians carried the emotional weight of records without receiving public credit. He mastered that role early, becoming one of the most reliable and tasteful guitarists in the industry while still in his teens. By the early 1970s, Parker was already a first-call session player in Los Angeles. He recorded guitar parts for an extraordinary list of artists including Marvin Gaye, Barry White, Chaka Khan, Stevie Wonder, and Bill Withers. His strength was not dominance, but control. Parker understood that R&B guitar existed to support melody, deepen groove, and polish atmosphere. Engineers often praised his consistency, noting that his parts rarely needed correction because his timing and tone were surgically precise. What distinguished Parker from many contemporaries was his musical intelligence. He treated the guitar like a conversation partner rather than a spotlight instrument. His clean chord voicings, subtle rhythmic accents, and carefully placed fills made songs feel fuller without ever crowding the vocal. On lush soul productions, his guitar acted as connective tissue, binding bass drums and harmony into a seamless whole. When a guitarist never steals attention yet makes everything sound better, is that mastery harder to recognize? Beyond session work, Parker also demonstrated strong leadership and compositional instincts. He founded the funk band Radio, scoring multiple R&B hits in the late 1970s and later transitioned into film and pop success without abandoning his roots. Unlike many crossover artists, he never discarded the discipline learned in soul studios. Even in pop settings, his guitar playing remained economical, groove-centered, and deeply musical. From a technical standpoint, Parker favored clarity over distortion, groove over aggression. His style influenced later generations of R&B and neo-soul players who learned that restraint could be transformative. Many modern producers still chase the warmth and balance he achieved naturally with a single guitar track. Although mainstream audiences often reduce Ray Parker Jr. to a single hit song, musicians know the truth. His real legacy lies in hundreds of recordings where his guitar quietly elevated performances that became timeless. He proved that you don't have to overpower a song to change it, you only have to understand it completely. Ray Parker Jr. stands as a reminder that R&B and soul were shaped not just by stars at the microphone, but by disciplined craftsmen who built the sound from the inside out. Teenie Hodges. Teenie Hodges was one of the most quietly essential architects of 1970s soul, a guitarist whose influence is felt instantly, even if his name often isn't. Born Mabon Teenie Hodges in Memphis, Tennessee in 1945, he grew up inside the sound that would later define Southern soul. Music wasn't a career choice for Hodges, it was environment. Surrounded by family musicians and steeped in church blues and rhythm, he developed a style rooted in feel rather than technique. Hodges became inseparable from the classic high record sound, most famously through his work with Al Green. On landmark recordings such as Let's Stay Together, Love and Happiness and Take Me to the River, his guitar did something rare, it breathed. Using muted strums, elastic timing, and warm chord voicings, Hodges created grooves that felt alive, never rigid, never rushed. Music historians consistently note that these records would lose their emotional depth without his rhythmic foundation. What set Teenie Hodges apart was intuition. He didn't play on the beat so much as around it, slightly behind the rhythm, allowing the song to sway naturally. His guitar parts often sounded deceptively simple, but they were the result of deep listening and restraint. He understood that soul music depended on tension and release, and his guitar became the subtle force guiding both. Producers trusted him because he knew when not to play a skill far rarer than speed or complexity. Hodges also co-wrote several major songs, including Take Me to the River, which later found renewed life through covers and samples across rock, R&B, and hip-hop. That songwriting success confirmed what musicians already knew. His musical mind extended far beyond the guitar. Despite shaping a sound that influenced generations, Teenie Hodges never pursued celebrity. He remained committed to the studio, the groove, and the collective feel of the music. Later neo-soul artists and producers frequently referenced the Memphis approach he embodied, loose, warm, and deeply human, as an antidote to overly polished modern production. Teenie Hodges passed away in 2014, but his guitar still speaks every time those High Records classics are played. His legacy isn't about flashy moments or solos remembered by name. It's about atmosphere, the kind that pulls listeners in without demanding attention. In the story of R&B and soul, Teenie Hodges represents a powerful truth. Sometimes the most important voice in the room isn't the loudest. It's the one that makes everything else feel right. Michael Hampton. Michael Hampton stands as one of the most electrifying yet under-acknowledged guitarists to emerge from the funk era. A musician who injected raw power into R&B and soul without abandoning their emotional core. Born in 1956, Hampton entered the world stage astonishingly young, joining the Parliament Funkadelic universe as a teenager. At an age when most players were still learning discipline, he was already redefining how intensity could live inside groove-driven black music. Hampton's breakthrough came through his ability to fuse seemingly opposite forces. He brought the aggression of rock guitar distortion, sustain, and explosive attack into a musical space that valued rhythm, feel, and collective movement. His playing didn't replace funk's foundation. It charged it. On live performances and studio recordings throughout the mid to late 1970s, his guitar lines cut through dense arrangements of horns, vocals, and percussion, adding urgency without chaos. What truly distinguished Hampton was emotional range. He could deliver searing high-energy riffs that felt confrontational, then pivot instantly into melodic phrasing filled with warmth and restraint. This balance allowed Parliament Funkadelic's music to feel unpredictable, yet grounded. Musicians often describe his approach as storytelling under pressure because even at full volume, his playing retained narrative shape rather than collapsing into noise. Hampton also changed expectations of age and authority in black music spaces. Being so young among seasoned performers forced him to communicate confidence through sound alone. He earned respect not by showmanship, but by consistency, night after night, translating George Clinton's expansive musical vision into something tangible and visceral. When a guitarist brings this much fire into a groove-based song, does it elevate the message or risk overwhelming it? Beyond the stage, Hampton's influence rippled outward. Later, funk rock hybrids, alternative R&B acts, and experimental soul musicians drew from his fearless integration of distortion and rhythm. He demonstrated that guitar in black music didn't have to choose between background support and lead dominance. It could do both within a single phrase. Despite his impact, Hampton rarely received the mainstream recognition given to vocalists or frontmen. His contributions were often absorbed into the spectacle surrounding Parliament Funkadelic, leaving his individual artistry under-discussed. Yet musicians know that without his guitar, the band's sound would have lacked urgency, danger, and emotional voltage. Michael Hampton's legacy lives in the tension he mastered, the push and pull between control and release. He proved that R&B and soul could absorb raw electricity without losing their humanity. In doing so, he expanded the emotional vocabulary of funk guitar, leaving a blueprint for artists who refused to choose between power and feeling. Catfish Collins. Catfish Collins was the embodiment of funk discipline, an artist who understood that rhythm, when handled with intention, could move crowds more powerfully than any spotlight solo. Born William Catfish Collins in Cincinnati, Ohio in 1943, he developed his musical instincts inside a working-class environment where groove was survival and timing was everything. When he joined James Brown's band in the mid-1960s, Collins didn't just follow the beat, he organized it. His approach to guitar was deeply percussive. Muted strings, clipped chords, and relentless syncopation defined his style. On foundational funk recordings such as Cold Sweat, his playing worked like a nervous system, transmitting energy from the drums through the entire band. Unlike blues-based guitarists who leaned on melody, Collins reduced harmony to its most essential components, proving that repetition, when precise, could feel alive rather than mechanical. After his time with James Brown, Collins became a crucial rhythmic force within the Parliament Funkadelic collective. In an environment known for theatrical excess and sonic experimentation, he served as an anchor. His guitar didn't compete with the spectacle, it grounded it. Each strum was deliberate, calibrated to make bodies move instinctively. Musicians often note that his parts were harder to replicate than they sounded because their power came from micro-timing rather than complexity. What separated Catfish Collins from many of his peers was restraint under pressure. Funk thrives on density, multiple instruments vying for space, but Collins knew exactly how much room to occupy. His guitar functioned like glue, binding bass drums and vocals into a unified pulse. That sensibility later echoed through disco, hip-hop, breakbeats, and modern R&B production, where rhythm guitar often operates as texture rather than lead. Despite shaping a musical language that continues to dominate popular music, Collins rarely received individual recognition. He didn't chase frontman status or brand his technique. Instead, he trusted the groove to speak for him. Producers valued his consistency, band leaders respected his discipline, and fellow musicians understood that without his timing, the music would collapse inward. Catfish Collins passed away in 2010, leaving behind a legacy etched into the DNA of funk and soul. His influence isn't found in flashy moments or viral clips. It lives in the spaces between beats, in the physical response listeners feel before they even understand why. He proved that rhythm guitar isn't a supporting role. When done right, it is the song. Leo Nocentelli. Leo Nocentelli is one of the most quietly influential guitarists in American music. A player whose work reshaped R&B, soul, and funk from the ground up without ever demanding attention. Born in New Orleans in 1946, Nocentelli came up in a city where rhythm was a language learned early and spoken fluently. By the time he became the guitarist for the Meters, he had already absorbed the syncopation of second-line parades, the looseness of blues, and the precision of early R&B, all of which would merge into a style that felt effortless, but changed everything. What made Nocentelli extraordinary was economy. He didn't rely on long solos or dramatic flourishes. Instead, he built grooves from short, perfectly placed phrases, single-note lines, clipped chords, and syncopated accents that conversed with the drums rather than sitting on top of them. On tracks like Sissy Strut Lukka, Pie Pie, and Just Kissed My Baby, his guitar became a rhythmic voice speaking in short sentences that left space for the listener to move inside the music. Nocentelli's playing redefined what tight could mean. While funk is often associated with aggression or density, his approach felt relaxed, almost conversational, yet absolutely locked in. That balance made the Meters one of the most influential rhythm sections in history. Their music became foundational material for later genres, and Nocentelli's guitar parts are now among the most sampled grooves in hip-hop, appearing sometimes unknowingly across decades of records. Unlike many guitarists, Nocentelli understood that leadership didn't require dominance. His lines often guided the band without announcing themselves, steering momentum through subtle shifts in timing and tone. Musicians who study his work often note how difficult it is to replicate, not because it's complex, but because it demands deep internal rhythm and patience. When a groove feels this natural, do you hear the skill behind it, or does it disappear into the feeling? Beyond the Meters. Nocentelli continued working across R&B, soul, and funk, maintaining the same philosophy: serve the groove first. He never chased reinvention for its own sake, trusting that authenticity would outlast trends. That trust proved well-placed as his style continues to influence producers, guitarists, and beatmakers, searching for timeless feel rather than surface-level excitement. Leo Nocentelli's legacy lives in movement, in heads nodding, feet tapping, and bodies responding before the mind catches up. He showed that guitar didn't need to shout to lead. Sometimes changing music forever only requires saying the right thing at exactly the right moment. David T. Walker. David T. Walker represents the purest definition of an unsung architect in R&B and soul. A guitarist whose influence is vast, measurable, and often invisible. Born in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1941 and raised in Los Angeles, Walker came of age during the golden era of studio musicianship, when records were built by craftsmen whose names rarely appeared on album covers. Over several decades, he became one of the most in-demand session guitarists in black music, contributing to hundreds of officially released recordings that helped define the sound of modern soul. Walker's resume reads like a map of American music history. His guitar appears on recordings by Marvin Gaye, Stevie Wonder, the Jackson 5, Minnie Riperton, Barry White, and countless others. What set him apart was not volume or virtuosity, but judgment. He possessed an uncanny ability to hear what a song needed. Sometimes a gentle chord, sometimes a passing fill, sometimes nothing at all. Producers trusted him because his instincts aligned perfectly with emotion, not ego. Technically, Walker favored warm tone, precise articulation, and melodic phrasing that felt conversational rather than assertive. His guitar often entered quietly, filling gaps listeners didn't even know existed. Unlike lead players who commanded attention, Walker specialized in elevation, making vocals feel richer, arrangements feel fuller, and grooves feel complete. Engineers frequently noted that his parts required little to no revision, a rarity in high-pressure studio environments where time equaled money. Walker's approach reshaped expectations of session guitar in R&B. He proved that subtlety could be structural, that a single well-placed note could carry as much weight as a solo. His style later influenced neo-soul musicians and contemporary producers who began valuing space tone and emotional clarity over complexity. Despite his enormous contribution, Walker never pursued mainstream fame. He remained committed to the studio, the ensemble, and the song itself. That choice likely cost him public recognition, but it preserved the integrity of his work. Musicians who know his catalog often describe him as a musician's musician, respected deeply within the industry, quietly essential to its success. David T. Walker's legacy is not tied to a single hit or iconic riff. It lives in consistency, in trust, and in the emotional cohesion of records that continue to resonate decades later. He showed that the highest form of artistry sometimes lies in knowing when not to be noticed. In the story of R&B and soul, David T. Walker stands as a quiet giant, a reminder that the music we love most is often shaped by hands we never see but always feel. These 12 guitarists didn't chase fame chart positions or headlines, but they shaped the emotional spine of R&B and soul in ways modern music still depends on. Their work raises an uncomfortable question. Why are the architects of black sound so often remembered less than the voices they supported? In an era driven by visuals, algorithms, and instant recognition, would musicians like these even survive today's industry or be ignored entirely? As listeners, we celebrate legends, but do we truly honor the builders behind them? That's the debate we leave you with. This is Legends of Black Excellence, where forgotten greatness gets its rightful place.